My name is Melody Wilson, and I'm 29 years old. Some of my clearest memories involve rain. Not the gentle spring showers that make flowers bloom, but the torrential downpours that soak you to the bone and leave you shivering. When I was 16, my father abandoned me on a country road during one such storm to teach me a lesson. He never expected my unexpected guardian to arrive that day, a stranger who would become the family I never had. I often wonder if blood really defines family, or if it's the people who stand beside you in the storm. Before I dive into the story that changed my life, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever found family in unexpected places. Now let's rewind to where it all began. ## Part 2, Childhood Background and First Disappointment. I grew up in Oak Ridge, a picturesque small town just outside Boston. Our house was a colonial-style two-story that my father, Frank Wilson, was immensely proud of. It represented everything he had accomplished as one of the town's most successful real estate developers. To the community, we were the perfect family, until we weren't. My mother died when I was 8 years old. Breast cancer. It was quick and devastating, leaving my father to raise me alone. Before her death, our home was filled with music, art, and laughter. My mother was a talented pianist who encouraged my early interest in drawing. After she was gone, the house fell silent except for my father's business calls and occasional stern lectures about responsibility. Frank Wilson believed in tough love. He operated on the principle that the world was harsh, and coddling would only make me weak. "Life doesn't give handouts, Melody," he would say. "You need to learn that early." Every challenge was framed as a character-building exercise, every disappointment a lesson. I was 10 when I won my first art competition. My drawing of our town's historic bridge captured the attention of my art teacher, who entered it in a county-wide contest. When I learned I had won first place, I was ecstatic. The award ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and despite my nervousness about asking, my father promised he would attend. "I'll be there," he said, barely looking up from his paperwork. "Just tell me the time." I spent hours preparing for that evening. I wore the blue dress my mother had bought me for my last birthday before she passed. I carefully brushed my hair and even borrowed a little lip gloss from my bathroom drawer, something my father would have frowned upon if he'd noticed. The school auditorium filled with parents and students. Each time the door opened, my heart leapt, thinking it was him. By the time my name was called, his seat remained empty. I walked onto the stage, accepted my certificate and small trophy, and scanned the crowd one last time. Nothing. The ceremony ended, and parents collected their children, offering congratulations and taking photos. I stood alone, clutching my trophy, making excuses to my teacher about why my father wasn't there. "He's probably just caught in traffic," I said, though I knew the drive from his office took only 15 minutes. A light rain had started by the time I began walking home. It was only a mile, but it felt much longer that day. I held my artwork and trophy inside my jacket to keep them dry, not caring that my hair was getting damp. When I arrived home, my father was in his office, phone pressed to his ear, discussing some property acquisition. He barely acknowledged me as I stood in the doorway, dripping onto the hardwood floor. I waited until he hung up. "I won," I said, holding up the trophy. He glanced at it briefly. "That's nice, Melody. Put it in your room. You said you would come." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I had an important client meeting. These art projects are fun, but they won't pay the bills. I'm teaching you about priorities." I retreated to my room, placed the trophy on my desk, and cried silently. That night, our neighbor Mrs. Parker noticed me sitting alone on our porch swing. She was a kind elderly woman who often checked in on me when my father was working late. "I saw your artwork at the school today," she said, sitting beside me and offering a plate of cookies. "I was there with my granddaughter. Your drawing was beautiful, dear." "You were there?" I asked, surprised. "Of course. My Emma told me all about your talent." She patted my hand. "You have a gift for seeing the structure of things. The way you captured the bridge, all those intricate supports and arches. Have you ever thought about architecture? I hadn't, but that conversation planted a seed. Mrs. Parker brought me books about famous buildings and architects. I began to see how my love of art could connect to something more concrete, something that might even earn my father's approval. This pattern continued throughout my childhood. My achievements were met with minimal acknowledgement, while my failures became teachable moments. I learned to celebrate my successes privately and to avoid showing disappointment when my father missed school events or forgot important dates. I built my dreams quietly, focusing on grades that would earn me scholarships and a ticket to independence. By 15, I had transformed my artistic talent into a passion for architectural design. My room was filled with sketches of buildings, bridges, and public spaces. I envisioned creating structures that would make people feel safe, welcome, and inspired. Everything our house had ceased to be. By 16, I had become a focused, determined student. My father's emotional distance had taught me self-reliance, and my grades reflected my drive to create my own future. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, participated in the architectural design club at school, and spent weekends volunteering with Habitat for Humanity to learn hands-on construction skills. My art teacher, Ms. Winters, had become a mentor. She recognized my potential and suggested I apply for a prestigious summer program at MIT for high school students interested in architecture. The 6-week program would allow me to study under practicing architects and university professors, potentially opening doors for college scholarships later. When the acceptance letter arrived, I was thrilled but apprehensive about telling my father. The program cost $3,000, money we had, but that my father would consider a frivolous expense. I prepared my case carefully, researching how the program could help me secure college scholarships worth much more than the initial investment. I approached him one evening after dinner, acceptance letter and research in hand. "Dad, I've been accepted to a summer architecture program at MIT, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's really competitive, only 30 students from across the country get in." He continued reading the newspaper. "MIT? In Cambridge?" "Yes. It's 6 weeks during summer break. I'd stay in the dorms." He lowered his paper. "And how much does this program cost?" I took a deep breath. $3,000. But it includes everything: room, board, materials. And it would really help with college applications and scholarships next year. His face hardened. $3,000 to draw pictures for 6 weeks? Absolutely not. It's not just drawing, Dad. It's architectural design. We'd be learning from professors and professional architects. This could help me get into a top program. Melody, this is exactly the kind of impractical thinking I've tried to protect you from. Your mother was the same way, head in the clouds, no sense of financial reality. The mention of my mother stung. He rarely spoke of her, and when he did, it was often to point out what he considered her flaws. This isn't impractical, I insisted. Architecture is a respected profession. The average starting salary is. I said no, he interrupted. You're 16. You don't need to be living in a city alone for 6 weeks, spending my hard-earned money on some fancy art camp. Something in me snapped. For years, I had accepted his dismissals and disappointments, but this was different. This was my future. It's not an art camp. It's a pre-professional program at one of the best universities in the country. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. And I wouldn't be spending your money. I have $1,200 saved from my tutoring job. I could pay for part of it. Enough. He slammed his hand on the table. This discussion is over. You're not going, and that's final. For the next week, I tried different approaches, showing him testimonials from previous participants who had received full scholarships, finding cheaper housing options with a family friend in Cambridge, even offering to work for his company over the holidays to repay the cost. Nothing worked. With the program's registration deadline approaching, I made a decision. I would go anyway. My acceptance included a partial need-based scholarship I hadn't told my father about, reducing the cost to $2,000. With my savings and the money my mother's parents had left me for education, which my father couldn't touch, I had enough. I quietly made arrangements. I confirmed my spot in the program, purchased a bus ticket to Cambridge, and packed a small suitcase that I hid in my closet. Mrs. Parker, who had become a confidant, agreed to water my small garden while I was gone. I left a letter explaining my decision on my desk, to be found after I'd left. The morning of my departure, I waited until my father left for work. My bus was scheduled for 11:30 a.m. I called a cab, retrieved my hidden suitcase, and took one last look around my room. I felt nervous but resolute. This was my one chance to pursue my dream. The cab had just pulled away when my father's car rounded the corner. He rarely came home during work hours, but today of all days, he had forgotten some documents. He saw me through the cab window, suitcase visible beside me. His face registered shock, then anger. By the time I arrived at the bus station, he was already there, having sped through town to intercept me. He stood by the ticket counter, arms crossed, face thunderous. "Dad, please," I began as I approached, but he grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit. "Is this how you repay me? Sneaking around, lying?" His voice was low but intense. People turned to stare. I wasn't lying. I was doing what I needed to do for my future. I tried to pull away, embarrassed by the scene we were creating. "Your future? You're 16. You don't know what's best for you. I know this program is important. Why can't you support me just once?" Tears welled in my eyes. He dragged me to his car, tossed my suitcase in the trunk, and slammed the door after pushing me into the passenger seat. We drove in silence, the atmosphere thick with tension. Outside, dark clouds gathered, matching his mood. Rain began to fall as we left the town limits, heading toward home on the back roads my father preferred. The downpour intensified, drumming against the roof and windshield, the wipers barely keeping up. About 5 miles from home, he suddenly pulled over onto the shoulder of the rural road. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and thunder rumbled in the distance. "You want independence so badly? You think you can make adult decisions?" His voice was eerily calm. "Get out." "What?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Get out of the car. If you want to make your own decisions, you can make your own way home." "Dad, it's pouring. We're miles from home. This is what the real world is like, Melody. Actions have consequences. This is the lesson you need to learn today." I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Get out," he shouted, making me jump. Shaking, I opened the door. The rain immediately soaked my clothes as I stepped onto the gravel shoulder. He reached across, pulled the door shut, and drove away without looking back, leaving me alone on the deserted country road. I stood in shock, the rain plastering my hair to my face, my clothes growing heavier with water. Thunder cracked overhead, and I flinched. The nearest house was at least a mile away. I had my phone, but the battery was low, and I had no one to call. My father expected me to walk home in disgrace, to arrive soaked and sorry, having learned my lesson. With no other choice, I began walking, tears mixing with rainwater on my face. Each step squished in my waterlogged sneakers. Cars occasionally passed, splashing more water onto me, but none stopped. Who would stop for a soaking wet teenager in a storm? As I walked, my shock gave way to anger. This wasn't parenting. This wasn't love. This was control and cruelty disguised as a life lesson. I had done nothing wrong except try to pursue my dreams. For the first time, I saw my father's actions clearly for what they were, and I made a promise to myself: when I left for college in 2 years, I would never return. The rain showed no signs of letting up as I trudged along the shoulder of the road. My clothes were completely soaked through, and my fingers had begun to prune. Each passing car sent waves of dirty water splashing over my already drenched form. I had been walking for about 20 minutes when a black Ford pickup truck slowed beside me. My first instinct was caution. Years of stranger danger warnings flashed through my mind. But as the passenger window rolled down, I saw a man in his late 30s with short-cropped hair and concerned eyes. "You need a ride," he called over the drumming of rain on his truck roof. "This is no weather to be walking in." I hesitated, shivering violently now. The man seemed to sense my apprehension. "Name's James Conroy," he said. "I live over in Ridgemont. Just coming back from visiting my sister." He reached into his wallet and pulled out what looked like an ID card. "I work in security. Private contractor. Look, I don't feel right leaving a kid out in this storm, but I understand if you're not comfortable." Something in his straightforward manner reassured me. Or perhaps it was simply that I was cold, wet, and had few options. "I'm trying to get to Oak Ridge," I said, my teeth chattering. "I can take you there." "No problem." He unlocked the door. "There's a towel on the seat you can use." I climbed in, grateful for the blast of warm air from the heater. The towel was clean, and I used it to dry my face and hair as best I could. "Thank you," I managed, still shivering. James adjusted the heat. "What happened? Car breakdown?" I stared out the window, unsure how much to share with this stranger. "My dad and I had a fight. He left me on the road to teach me a lesson." James's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but his voice remained calm. "That's quite a lesson. He does things like this sometimes. Says the world is harsh, and I need to be prepared." James was quiet for a moment. "Mind if I ask how old you are?" 16. He nodded, seeming to process this information. I'm not one to judge another person's parenting, but there are better ways to prepare someone for life's challenges. Something about his calm, matter-of-fact tone made me feel safe enough to continue. "I got accepted to this architecture program at MIT for the summer. He wouldn't let me go, so I tried to go anyway. That's why he was so angry." "Architecture, huh?" James glanced at me with newfound interest. "That's a solid field. My sister's husband is in construction. Says architects with practical knowledge are worth their weight in gold." As we drove, James shared bits of his own story. He had grown up in the foster system after his parents died in a car accident when he was 7. His sister had been adopted by another family, and they had reconnected as adults. He had served in the military for 12 years before starting his own security consulting business. "Never had a real father figure," he said. "Had some good foster dads and some not so good ones. Learned that family isn't always about blood." By the time we reached the outskirts of Oak Ridge, the rain had subsided to a drizzle. I directed him to my house, a knot forming in my stomach at the thought of facing my father again. "That's it," I said, pointing to our colonial-style home. "The white one with the black shutters." James pulled into the driveway. "Want me to walk you to the door?" I nodded, suddenly afraid to face my father alone. As we approached the front door, it swung open. My father stood there, his face a mask of controlled anger that faltered momentarily when he saw I wasn't alone. "Who are you?" he demanded, looking at James. "James Conroy, sir. I found your daughter walking in the storm and gave her a ride home." My father's eyes narrowed. "Thank you for your assistance." "Melody, get inside." I didn't move. Something about James's presence gave me courage. "Sir," James said, his voice polite but firm, "I don't mean to overstep, but leaving a minor alone on a country road during a thunderstorm is dangerous." "This is a family matter," my father replied coldly. "Melody disobeyed me and needed to understand the consequences." "I understand discipline, sir. I served 12 years military. But there are safer ways to teach lessons." My father's face flushed. "I don't need parenting advice from a stranger." Not offering advice, James replied calmly. "Just concerned about safety." They stared at each other for a long moment, my father clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by another man. Finally, he stepped back. "Melody, inside. Now." I looked at James, reluctant to leave the first adult who had stood up for me in years. "It's okay," James said quietly. "But here." He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "My personal number. If you need anything at all, you call me." My father started to protest, but James cut him off. "Sir, with all due respect, I found your daughter alone on a dangerous road in a thunderstorm. I'm leaving my number in case she needs a ride again. That's all." I took the card, tucking it quickly into my pocket before my father could snatch it away. "Thank you," I whispered. As James turned to leave, he gave my father one last look. "She seems like a bright kid with a good head on her shoulders. That architecture program sounds like a great opportunity." After he drove away, my father and I had another argument, but it lacked the intensity of the earlier confrontation. Something had shifted. Perhaps it was having his actions witnessed by an outsider, or maybe it was the quiet authority James had projected. Whatever the reason, my father didn't mention the MIT program again, and he never took James's card from me. That night, I added the card to my small box of treasures, alongside my mother's silver locket and my first art competition ribbon. I didn't know then how important that small rectangle of cardstock would become, or how the man who had given it to me would change my life. The next 2 years of high school unfolded in ways I never could have predicted. The day after the rainstorm incident, I received a text message from an unknown number. "This is James from yesterday. Just checking that you're okay. No need to respond if you don't want to." I hesitated before replying, "I'm okay. Thank you again for the ride." What began as occasional check-in texts gradually evolved into something more meaningful. When I mentioned my upcoming architectural design competition, James asked if it was open to the public. I didn't expect him to actually attend, but there he was, sitting quietly in the back row as I presented my sustainable community center design to the judges. I won second place. My father didn't come, claiming an important business meeting. But James was there, applauding as I received my certificate. "That was impressive," he said afterward, as we sat in a nearby coffee shop. "You really thought about how people would use the space." "That's what interests me most," I explained, animated by his genuine interest. "Buildings aren't just structures, they shape how people interact, how they feel." James nodded. "I've been in buildings all over the world. The good ones, you don't even notice how they're affecting you. The bad ones make everything harder." Over the following months, James became a steady presence in my life. He never overstepped or tried to replace my father, but he showed up consistently when it mattered. He helped me research colleges with strong architecture programs. He reviewed scholarship applications. When I needed to visit campuses, he offered to drive me. My father noticed, of course. At first, he was suspicious, questioning James's motives. But even he couldn't deny that James was respectful and appropriate. He never undermined my father's authority directly. He simply provided support that my father either couldn't or wouldn't give. "Why are you doing all this?" I asked James once, as we drove back from visiting Rhode Island School of Design. He was quiet for a moment. "When I was your age, I had nobody. Foster system shuffled me around so much that nobody kept track of what I was good at or what I wanted. Almost joined a gang just to belong somewhere." He glanced at me. "Sometimes one person showing up can change everything." My high school wrestling coach became that person for me. Steered me toward the military, wrote recommendations. Probably saved my life. The summer before my senior year, I applied again to the MIT program, this time with James's encouragement and my father's grudging permission. The previous year's application helped me secure a larger scholarship, making it more difficult for my father to object on financial grounds. Those 6 weeks in Cambridge confirmed everything I had hoped: architecture was my calling. I thrived in the structured yet creative environment, earning praise from professors who encouraged me to apply for MIT's undergraduate program. When senior year began, I attacked my college applications with laser focus. I applied to MIT, Cornell, RISD, and several other schools with strong architecture programs. James reviewed my essays, offering practical feedback that strengthened my personal statement. My father remained emotionally distant but had decreased his active opposition to my plans. The confrontation with James seemed to have changed something in our dynamic. He still didn't attend school events or express interest in my architectural projects, but he no longer actively discouraged them either. The MIT acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in April. Full scholarship. I called James before telling my father. "I knew you could do it," he said, his voice warm with pride. "Your mom would have been so proud, Melody." That comment, simple as it was, meant everything. My father rarely mentioned my mother, and when he did, it was never in the context of what would have made her proud. When I told my father that evening, his response was predictably measured. "MIT is a good school," he said, nodding slightly. "Practical choice. Better than an art school." From him, this was nearly effusive praise. Graduation day arrived in June. James sat in the audience alongside my father, an awkward arrangement, but one I had insisted upon. Both men had played roles in my journey, for better or worse. The graduation dinner afterward was a study in contrasts. My father took us to an expensive restaurant, ordering champagne for himself and James, sparkling cider for me. The conversation was stilted, with James attempting to engage my father in neutral topics like Boston sports teams and real estate trends. After dessert, my father excused himself to take a business call. While he was gone, James handed me a gift bag. "Open it now," he said with a smile. "Before he gets back." Inside was a professional drafting kit, the expensive kind I had admired in architecture magazines but could never afford. "James, this is too much," I protested. "You'll need it at MIT," he said simply. "Consider it an investment in a future architect who might design my retirement home someday." When my father returned, he placed an envelope beside my plate. "My gift," he said. "For college." Inside was a check for $10,000, more money than I had ever seen with my name on it. But before I could thank him, he added the condition. "This is for practical expenses. Not for frivolous art supplies or spring break trips." The control was still there, wrapped in financial generosity. After years of his conditional support, I made a decision that surprised even me. "Thank you, Dad, but I can't accept this." His eyebrows shot up. "What?" "I appreciate the gesture, but I have a full scholarship. I'll get a part-time job for spending money." I slid the envelope back toward him. "I need to do this on my own." The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. James gave me a subtle nod of approval as we left the restaurant. Moving day in August marked the true beginning of my independence. James helped me pack his truck with the few belongings I was taking to MIT. My father stood awkwardly in the driveway, unsure of his role in this transition. "Call when you get settled," he said as I prepared to leave. "And remember, focus on the technical classes. That's where the value is." I hugged him briefly, one of our few physical contacts in years. "I will." "Goodbye, Dad." As James and I drove away, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time in my life, I was heading towards something, not running away. "You okay?" James asked as we hit the highway. I looked out at the open road ahead. "Yeah. I think I really am." My freshman year at MIT unfolded in a whirlwind of classes, projects, and new friendships. I called James at least once a week, sharing my challenges and triumphs. My father received monthly emails with brief updates on my academic progress, the only communication he seemed to truly value. In November, I entered my first collegiate design competition. My project, a community arts center designed to serve diverse neighborhoods in urban settings, won first place. The department chair personally congratulated me, mentioning that my understanding of how communities interact with public spaces showed unusual maturity. I sent my father photos of the winning design and the award ceremony. His response was a brief congratulations text. 2 days later, he called to tell me he was coming to campus for a business trip and wanted to meet for dinner. His unexpected visit left me anxious. For months, I had been building my new identity, free from his criticism and conditional approval. Now he was entering my carefully constructed new world. Fast forward to my senior year at MIT. At 22, I was preparing to graduate with honors in architecture. The frightened 16-year-old caught in the rain seemed like a different person entirely. For years of rigorous education, supportive mentors, and freedom from my father's constant criticism had transformed me. My portfolio had caught the attention of several prestigious firms, and I had accepted an internship with Harrington and Associates in Boston, known for their innovative sustainable designs. My thesis project, a mixed-use development that incorporated affordable housing, green spaces, and cultural venues, had received the department's highest honors. James had remained a constant in my life, attending every important event and offering steady support. He had recently started his own security consulting firm and was doing well. We had developed a comfortable routine of Sunday phone calls and monthly visits. He had become the family I chose. My relationship with my father, meanwhile, had settled into a distant cordiality. Our communications were infrequent and superficial. He occasionally sent newspaper clippings about architectural projects in New England, his version of showing interest. I sent him updates about my academic achievements, knowing they were the only aspects of my life he truly valued. So I was surprised when, 3 weeks before graduation, I received an unusually warm email from him. "Melody, I've been following your progress from afar and am impressed by what you've accomplished. Your determination has paid off, just as I always said it would. I'd like to host a small gathering at the house the weekend before your graduation to celebrate your success. Several of my business associates have expressed interest in meeting you, and this would be a good opportunity to make professional connections. Let me know if Saturday the 14th works for your schedule. Dad." I read the email several times, trying to process this unexpected overture. In 4 years, my father had visited campus exactly twice, both times combining the trips with business meetings in Boston. He had never before expressed pride in my accomplishments or offered to celebrate them. I called James for advice. "What do you think? Should I go?" I asked after reading him the email. "What does your gut tell you?" James replied, his usual approach of helping me trust my own judgment. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe he's genuinely proud and trying to reconnect. Another part of me is suspicious." "Both could be true," James said thoughtfully. "People are complicated. He might be proud of you and have ulterior motives." After consideration, I decided to accept the invitation. If my father was making a genuine effort, I didn't want to reject it. And if he wasn't, well, I was no longer the vulnerable teenager desperate for his approval. I replied to his email, "Thank you for the invitation. Saturday the 14th works for me. I'll drive down Friday evening and stay overnight if that's convenient." His response came quickly, "Excellent. Your room is as you left it." That should have comforted me, but it only highlighted how rarely I had returned home over the past 4 years. My childhood bedroom had essentially become a time capsule of my former life. As the weekend approached, my anxiety grew. I confided in my roommate, Aisha, who had heard many stories about my complicated relationship with my father. "Just remember, you're not that scared kid anymore," she reminded me as I packed my overnight bag. "You're Melody Wilson, soon-to-be MIT graduate with a killer job lined up. His approval doesn't determine your worth." I repeated her words like a mantra during the drive from Cambridge to Oak Ridge. As I approached my childhood home, I was struck by how small it seemed compared to my memories. The colonial-style house that once represented my father's success now looked merely tasteful but ordinary. He greeted me at the door with an awkward half-hug. "You look well," he said, stepping back to examine me. "College agrees with you." "Thank you," I replied, taking in the subtle changes in his appearance. At 54, he had more gray at his temples, and new lines around his eyes, but he still maintained the imposing presence I remembered. "I prepared the guest room," he said, gesturing upstairs. "I thought you might prefer it to your old bedroom." This unexpected consideration caught me off guard. Thank you, that's thoughtful. The evening passed in surprisingly comfortable conversation. My father asked about my thesis project and seemed genuinely interested in my explanations of sustainable design principles. He shared updates about developments in Oak Ridge, including a new arts center that would have interested my teenage self. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps he had changed, that time and distance had given him perspective on our relationship. Saturday morning, I awoke to the sounds of activity downstairs. Catering staff were setting up for the afternoon gathering, arranging elegant hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes in our rarely used formal dining room. I've invited about 20 people, my father explained over breakfast. Key business associates, local officials, a few neighbors. People who could be valuable connections for you. The guest list surprised me. I didn't realize you were planning such a formal event. You're an MIT graduate entering a competitive field, he said matter-of-factly. Networking is essential. I helped with the final preparations, arranging flowers, and setting out cocktail napkins. By 3 o'clock, guests began arriving, mostly men in business casual attire, a few accompanied by wives in tasteful dresses. I recognized some of my father's longtime business partners and several town council members. My father introduced me repeatedly as my daughter, the MIT architecture graduate. Each time, he placed a hand on my shoulder in a gesture of pride that felt foreign after years of emotional distance. As the afternoon progressed, I began to notice a pattern. When introducing me to developers and investors, my father emphasized different aspects of my education. Melody specialized in commercial development planning, he told one man, though my focus had actually been on sustainable community spaces. She's particularly interested in luxury residential design, he informed another, despite my thesis focusing on affordable housing solutions. I began to feel uneasy, correcting these mischaracterizations as politely as possible. My father would smile tightly and guide the conversation elsewhere. During a momentary lull, I stepped into the kitchen for a break from the performance. Through the door, I overheard my father speaking to a small group of men. The Wilson Development Group is expanding into more innovative architectural designs, he was saying. Having an MIT-trained architect in the family creates unique opportunities for our investors. I froze, the realization dawning slowly. This wasn't a celebration of my accomplishments. It was a business opportunity for my father. He was leveraging my degree to impress potential investors, positioning himself to capitalize on my education. I remained in the kitchen, trying to process this betrayal, when I heard one of the men ask, "Frank, how did you manage to raise such an accomplished daughter as a single father?" Most kids would have gone off the rails. My father's response cut through me like a knife. "Tough love," he said confidently. I pushed her to be tough. That's why she succeeded. Too many parents coddle their children these days. Melody learned early that the world doesn't hand out participation trophies. The utter rewriting of our history, the portrayal of his emotional neglect as strategic parenting, was too much. I stepped back into the room, locking eyes with my father. The momentary flash of alarm on his face confirmed what I already knew: this entire weekend was a performance. "Excuse me," I said to the guests nearest me. "I need some air." I walked out to the backyard, my hands shaking with anger and disappointment. How could I have been naive enough to believe he had changed? That he finally saw me as a person rather than an extension of himself or a tool for his ambitions? My father followed me outside a few minutes later. "Melody, what's wrong?" "We have guests." "What's wrong?" I repeated incredulously. "You're using my degree to pitch to investors. You're taking credit for my success after years of undermining and dismissing my goals." He had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "You're overreacting. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Is it wrong to want to share that with my business associates?" "You're not sharing it, you're exploiting it. And you're misrepresenting my work to suit your business interests." "I'm helping you make connections," he countered, his voice hardening. "This is how the real world works, Melody. It's not about your idealistic designs for community spaces. It's about who you know and how you position yourself. This isn't about me at all, I said, the clarity painful but liberating. It never has been. Our argument escalated, years of suppressed feelings erupting like a volcano. Guests pretended not to notice, but the tension was palpable as our voices carried through the open patio doors. You never supported my dreams. I finally shouted. Not once. And now you want to profit from them? I put a roof over your head and food on the table, he retorted. I taught you the value of hard work and perseverance. Who do you think paid for those art supplies and school trips? Mom did, I replied quietly. The trust fund she left for my education paid for everything that mattered. You just managed the money. His face contorted with anger. Your mother was as impractical and emotional as you are. No wonder you turned out this way. The first drops of rain began to fall as dark clouds gathered overhead, a cruelly perfect echo of that day 6 years ago. I'm leaving, I said, turning toward the house. Running away when things get difficult? Just like her, he called after me. This is why your mother couldn't love you either. I stopped in my tracks, his words cutting deeper than any previous hurt. Never before had he suggested my mother hadn't loved me. It was a line I didn't know he was capable of crossing. Without another word, I walked through the house, past the confused guests, and up to the guest room. I packed my overnight bag with shaking hands as the rain intensified outside, turning into another summer thunderstorm. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I simply walked out the front door into the downpour, my father's cruel words echoing in my head. By the time I reached my car, I was already soaked, tears mixing with rainwater on my face, just like that day when I was 16. As I drove away, the parallel was impossible to ignore. Once again, I was leaving my father's house in a rainstorm, emotional and alone. But this time, I had somewhere to turn. With blurred vision, I pulled over and called the one person who had never let me down. James? My voice broke. I need you. Where are you? James asked without hesitation, his voice instantly alert. On Maple Street, about a mile from my father's house, I managed between sobs. Stay there. I'm coming. I'm in Boston, so it'll take me about 40 minutes. Are you safe? Is your car off the road? I assured him I was safely pulled over, then sat in my car watching the windshield wipers battle the torrential rain. The storm had intensified, matching my emotional state. Thunder cracked overhead, making me flinch. True to his word, James's black pickup appeared exactly 42 minutes later. He pulled up behind me and ran to my car, rain soaking through his jacket. I hadn't moved since our call. Come on, he said, opening my door. Let's get you into my truck. Once inside his vehicle, with the heater running and a blanket around my shoulders, I told him everything, the fake celebration, my father using my degree to impress investors, his cruel words about my mother. James listened without interrupting, his face growing increasingly somber. When I finished, he handed me a bottle of water from his center console. Your things are still at his house, he asked. I nodded. Just my overnight bag and laptop. But I don't want to go back there. You don't have to. I'll get them for you. James, no. It's not worth confronting him. This isn't about confrontation, Melody. It's about getting your belongings. His calm voice belied the determination in his eyes. And maybe saying a few things that need to be said. Despite my protests, James was resolute. We drove back to my father's house, where several cars still sat in the driveway despite the dramatic scene that had transpired. The gathering apparently continued even after my exit. Wait here, James said. I'll be quick. I'm coming with you, I insisted, finding courage in his presence. These are supposedly my connections to make, right? I should at least say goodbye properly. We walked to the front door, James holding an umbrella over us both, a stark contrast to my father leaving me to the elements years before. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. My father opened the door, his expression shifting from annoyance to surprise when he saw James standing beside me. "Mr. Wilson," James said with formal politeness. Melody came back for her things. "You called him?" my father asked me incredulously. "Instead of working this out with your own family?" "He is my family," I replied quietly. We stepped inside, water dripping onto the entryway floor. A few guests lingered in the living room, watching our entrance with poorly disguised curiosity. "We'll just get her bag and laptop, and we'll be out of your way," James said. My father's jaw tightened. "I told you she needed a ride last time. I'm her backup plan." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. "No," James corrected him evenly. "I'm her support system. There's a difference." I went upstairs to collect my belongings, leaving the two men in a tense standoff. When I returned a few minutes later, they had moved to my father's study, away from the prying eyes of the remaining guests. "She succeeded despite you, not because of you," James was saying as I entered the room. "Your tough love approach was just neglect with a fancy name." My father scoffed. "What would you know about raising a child? You're not a parent. You're not even a relative. I know that children need support, not abandonment. I know that leaving a 16-year-old girl alone on a country road in a thunderstorm isn't teaching a lesson, it's endangering a minor." "This is none of your business," my father snapped. "You made it my business when I found her walking alone in the rain 6 years ago," James replied, his voice still controlled but intense. "And you made it my business again today when she called me crying because of your cruelty." My father turned to me. "This is ridiculous, Melody. You're an adult now. You don't need this man fighting your battles." I found my voice. "He's not fighting my battles. He's standing with me while I fight my own." "Very poetic," my father said dismissively. "Perhaps you should have studied creative writing instead of architecture." James stepped forward. "Mr. Wilson, I've respected your position as Melody's father for years. I've never tried to replace you or undermine you. But I need to say this clearly, your behavior today was unacceptable." "I don't answer to you," my father retorted. "No, but you might answer to the IRS," James replied calmly. My father's face paled slightly. "What are you talking about? I've been in security for a long time. Part of my job is due diligence on potential clients. When Melody started college, I took the liberty of looking into your business practices, just to be sure she wouldn't be blindsided by anything unexpected." My father's expression shifted from dismissive to wary. "You investigated me?" "I looked into public records," James clarified. "Property transfers, tax assessments, permit applications. I found some inconsistencies. Particularly with the Riverside Development Project." I watched my father's confident facade crack. The Riverside project had been his largest development, a luxury condominium complex on formerly industrial land. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Environmental impact reports that mysteriously changed between submissions. Zoning variances granted after private meetings with officials who later bought units at below market rates." James shrugged. "I'm not saying it's illegal. I'm just saying a focused audit might raise questions." The power dynamic in the room had shifted palpably. My father, always the authority figure, suddenly seemed diminished. "What do you want?" he asked tensely. "Nothing," James replied. "I'm not threatening you. I'm simply suggesting that people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Melody deserves your respect, not your manipulation." I stepped forward, finding strength in the moment. "Dad, I didn't come back to fight. I came back hoping things had changed, that maybe you had changed. But they haven't, and you haven't." "Melody," he began, but I continued. "I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your connections or your resources. I built my own life, my own support system." I gestured to James. "And I've learned what real family looks like. It's not about blood or obligation. It's about showing up, consistently, even when it's inconvenient." My father looked from me to James and back again, seeing perhaps for the first time the bond that had formed between us. "You turned my daughter against me," he said to James, a last desperate accusation. "No, sir," James replied quietly. "You did that yourself, one missed event, one criticism, one rainstorm at a time." We left without further confrontation. Outside, the rain had slowed to a gentle patter. James held the umbrella over me as we walked to his truck, my belongings safely stowed in my backpack. Through the living room window, I could see my father watching us leave. For a moment, our eyes met, and I thought I glimpsed something like regret in his expression. But perhaps that was just wishful thinking on my part, the daughter in me still hoping for a father who could see me clearly. As we pulled away from the house, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and liberation. It wasn't the reconciliation I had hoped for, but it was the closure I needed. "Thank you," I said to James as we drove through the rain-slicked streets of my hometown. "Not just for today, but for everything." "That's what family does," he replied simply. 3 years passed, each one carrying me further from that rainy confrontation and deeper into a life of my own design. At 25, I had completed my internship at Harrington and Associates and, with their blessing and support, branched out to start my own small architectural firm, Wilson Design Studio. My specialty had evolved naturally from my personal experiences, creating spaces that felt like genuine homes, places of security, comfort, and belonging. My tagline, "Building spaces that shelter more than bodies," reflected my philosophy that architecture at its best provides emotional sanctuary as well as physical protection. My first major commission came from an unexpected source. The town of Oak Ridge, yes, my hometown, was developing a new community center and affordable housing complex. The selection committee, impressed by my portfolio and unaware of my connection to the town, invited me to submit a proposal. When I arrived for the interview and several committee members recognized me as Frank Wilson's daughter, I worried my family history might count against me. Instead, I presented my vision for a space that would foster connection across generations and backgrounds, a design informed by my understanding of how physical environments shape human interaction. The central courtyard featured a sweeping canopy that provided shelter from rain while allowing natural light to filter through, a deliberate metaphor for protection that doesn't isolate. I won the contract, and the Oak Ridge Community Commons became my first signature project. Throughout the development process, James remained my steadfast supporter, attending every major presentation and offering practical advice on security considerations for the residential spaces. Over these years, James's role in my life had evolved and deepened. He wasn't just my emergency contact or occasional mentor, he had become the family I chose, the person I called first with good news or bad, the one who never failed to show up. When he suffered a minor heart attack at 52, I took leave from work to help during his recovery. When I broke up with my long-term boyfriend after discovering his infidelity, James offered both a shoulder to cry on and his guest room for as long as I needed it. We had built a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care, something I had never experienced with my biological father. Speaking of my father, life has a way of bringing unexpected encounters. One rainy Tuesday in Boston, as I hurried between meetings with potential clients, I nearly collided with a man exiting a coffee shop. "I'm sorry," I began, then froze as I recognized my father. He looked older, diminished somehow. His tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, and the confident posture I remembered had given way to a slight stoop. "Melody," he said, seeming equally surprised. How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, regaining my composure. "I have my own firm now." "I know," he said, surprising me. "I saw the article in Boston Architecture Monthly. The Oak Ridge project, it's impressive." An awkward silence fell between us as rain pattered on my umbrella. "Would you like to get coffee?" he asked tentatively. "Just to catch up?" 3 years earlier, I might have agreed out of lingering hope or obligation. But standing there in the rain, no longer afraid of storms, literal or emotional, I recognized that while forgiveness was possible, resuming a relationship wasn't necessary. "I appreciate the offer," I said gently, "but I have a meeting I can't miss." Maybe another time. He nodded, accepting my polite deflection. You look happy, Melody. I am, I confirmed, and meant it. Good. That's good. He hesitated, then added, I made mistakes. Many mistakes. It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was unprecedented acknowledgement. I didn't need to forgive him in that moment, nor did I need to reject his small overture. Yes, you did, I agreed simply. Take care of yourself, Dad. As I walked away, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness, just a quiet acceptance that some relationships serve their purpose by showing us what we don't want, by teaching us to recognize what we do deserve. That encounter reinforced what had become central to my life philosophy: family isn't defined by DNA but by consistent presence, by showing up when it matters, by offering shelter from life's storms. This understanding informed both my personal relationships and my professional work. Wilson Design Studio grew steadily, gaining recognition for creating spaces that fostered genuine community. I established a foundation that provided scholarships for young artists and architects from disadvantaged backgrounds, paying forward the support that had been so crucial to my own journey. James remained my most trusted advisor and friend. When he finally reconnected with his long-estranged sister, I helped them navigate their complicated relationship, offering insights from my own experience with family complexity. In time, James's elderly mother, who had been in assisted living for years, became another unexpected addition to our chosen family. Though suffering from advancing dementia, she embraced me as James's girl, sometimes confusing me for a daughter he never had. Rather than correcting her, we leaned into the mistake, finding joy in the family we were creating through choice rather than circumstance. Our holiday traditions evolved into a blend of James's military precision. Christmas decorations went up the day after Thanksgiving, not a day before or after, and my artistic spontaneity. We hosted gatherings for others who found themselves without family during the holidays: colleagues, neighbors, students from my scholarship program who couldn't travel home. Now at 29, standing under an umbrella at James's daughter's soccer game, not his biological daughter, but the child of a close friend who had named him Godfather, I reflected on how far I had come from that terrified 16-year-old abandoned in a rainstorm. The rain fell steadily around us, but unlike that day 13 years ago, I wasn't alone or afraid. James stood beside me, cheering enthusiastically as 12-year-old Zoe made a brilliant save as goalkeeper. She's got good instincts, he commented proudly. She's had good guidance, I replied, thinking of how James had practiced with her every weekend for months. Rain no longer symbolized abandonment or punishment in my life. Instead, it had become associated with renewal and unexpected gifts: the storm that had led me to James, the rain that had accompanied my final confrontation with my father, and now this ordinary spring shower falling on a Saturday soccer game that was anything but ordinary in its simple joy. Life rarely unfolds as we expect. The family we're born into sometimes creates the very storms from which we need shelter. But if we're fortunate, we find people who hold umbrellas over us until we learn to dance in the rain, people who show us that true family is built through thousands of small moments of showing up, of choosing to be present, of offering shelter when the skies open. This is the deepest lesson I've learned: pain can lead to unexpected gifts if we remain open to receiving them. The worst day of my young life, being abandoned in a rainstorm, ultimately led me to the most authentic family connection I've ever known. What about you? Has someone unexpected become your chosen family? Who holds an umbrella over you during life's storms? Drop a comment below to share your story. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about finding family in unexpected places. Remember that sometimes the family we choose sees us through the storms that the family we're born into creates. Thank you for listening, and may you always find shelter when you need it most.